The sound of a single piano key being struck over and over echoed through the practice room like a metronome counting down the seconds of someone's dream dying. Maya Chen sat frozen on the worn bench, her fingers trembling above the ivory keys, unable to move forward with the piece she'd been working on for months. Across the room, her teacher stood with arms crossed, lips pressed into a thin line of disapproval that had become all too familiar over the past 2 years. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Maya had been 12 years old when she first walked through the doors of the Riverside Conservatory, a prestigious music academy housed in a converted mansion on the edge of town. The building itself seemed to breathe music, with its high ceilings and tall windows that let in streams of golden afternoon light. Practice rooms lined the hallways like cells in a monastery, each one containing a student bent over their instrument in devotion to their craft. For Maya, being accepted into the conservatory's youth program had felt like winning the lottery. Her parents, who ran a small grocery store in the immigrant neighborhood across the bridge, had scraped together every penny they could spare to pay for her lessons. Her mother had taken on extra shifts at the store, opening earlier and closing later. Her father had given up his one luxury, the cigarettes he'd smoked since he was a teenager, putting that money aside for Maya's musical education instead. The conservatory had 3 piano teachers, but Maya had been assigned to Vivian Hartley, a woman whose reputation preceded her like a cold wind. Mrs. Hartley had been a concert pianist in her youth, performing in European halls and earning critical acclaim before an injury to her right hand had ended her performing career at 35. She'd turned to teaching with the kind of bitterness that comes from dreams cut short, and she brought that bitterness into every lesson, every critique, every interaction with her students. She was known for producing technically flawless players, but also for breaking spirits along the way. Students who survived her teaching either emerged as diamonds or left music entirely, and there was rarely anything in between. From the very first lesson, Maya had sensed something hostile in the way Mrs. Hartley looked at her. It wasn't just the usual teacher scrutiny or the high standards one might expect from a prestigious conservatory. There was something personal in it, something Maya couldn't quite name. Mrs. Hartley would watch Maya's hands move across the keys with an expression that seemed almost angry, as if the sight of this young girl playing offended her on some deep level. During those early months, Maya had tried everything to earn her teacher's approval. She practiced until her fingers ached and her back cramped from sitting too long. She memorized pieces faster than any other student in her age group. She studied music theory late into the night, falling asleep with textbooks open on her chest. But no matter what she did, no matter how perfectly she executed a passage or how much emotion she poured into her playing, Mrs. Hartley remained coldly unimpressed. The other students noticed it too. In the common room where they gathered between lessons, whispers would follow Maya. "Poor thing," one older student had said. "Hartley's really got it out for her. Don't know why." Maya's only friend at the conservatory was a boy named James, a violinist with a kind smile who always saved her a seat at the lunch table. He'd been studying with his teacher for 4 years and had warned Maya early on. "Hartley's the toughest teacher here. But if you can make it through, you'll be incredible. Just don't let her get in your head." But how could Maya not let it get in her head when every lesson felt like a small death? Mrs. Hartley would stop her mid-piece, sometimes after just a few measures, and point out flaws that seemed impossibly small. "Your pinky finger is a fraction too high. You're rushing the tempo by 0.03 seconds. That chord lacks conviction." The criticisms were relentless and often contradictory. One week, Maya would be told she played with too much emotion, too much rubato, too much personal interpretation. The next week, the same piece would be criticized for being too mechanical, too rigid, lacking soul. Maya's parents didn't understand classical music. They'd grown up in a small village in southern China where survival mattered more than art, and they'd immigrated to America with nothing but determination and hope for a better future. But they understood hard work, and they understood their daughter's passion. Every evening when Maya came home from the conservatory, her mother would have dinner waiting, and her father would ask how her lesson went. Maya always said it was fine, good, getting better, because she couldn't bear to tell them the truth. She couldn't admit that their sacrifices might be for nothing, that their daughter might not have what it takes. At night, lying in her small bedroom above the store, Maya would stare at the ceiling and wonder if Mrs. Hartley was right to be so hard on her. Maybe she really wasn't good enough. Maybe she was wasting everyone's time and money. Maybe the dream of becoming a concert pianist was just that, a dream, and she needed to wake up. The conservatory held recitals twice a year where students performed for an audience of parents, faculty, and local music enthusiasts. These recitals were important showcases, opportunities for students to demonstrate their progress and for teachers to display the results of their instruction. Maya had performed in 3 recitals so far, and each time, Mrs. Hartley had seemed almost disappointed when Maya played well. After her second recital, when Maya had performed a difficult Chopin piece without a single mistake and received enthusiastic applause, Mrs. Hartley had pulled her aside in the empty hallway. "Don't let it go to your head," she'd said, her voice sharp as glass. "The audience here is easily impressed. Real critics would tear that performance apart." Maya had felt the joy of her success drain away instantly, replaced by shame and confusion. Now, 2 years into her studies at the conservatory, Maya sat in the practice room for what would become the most devastating lesson of her young life. She'd been working on Rachmaninoff's Prelude in G minor, a piece that was technically beyond her current level but one she'd fallen in love with the moment she heard it. The dark, brooding opening, the way it built to moments of almost unbearable intensity before falling back into quiet contemplation, it spoke to something deep inside her. She'd been practicing it obsessively for 3 months, sometimes 6 or 7 hours a day, neglecting her schoolwork and her social life, pouring everything she had into mastering this piece. She'd thought, hoped, believed that if she could just play this piece perfectly, if she could show Mrs. Hartley what she was truly capable of, then finally, she might earn a word of praise, a nod of approval, some sign that she belonged here. Mrs. Hartley had listened in silence as Maya played through the entire piece. For once, she hadn't stopped her, hadn't interrupted with corrections. Maya had taken this as a good sign and had poured her heart into the performance, playing with all the emotion and technical skill she possessed. When the final notes faded away, Maya had sat with her hands still resting on the keys, breathing hard, waiting for her teacher's response. The silence stretched out for what felt like an eternity. Then Mrs. Hartley had walked slowly across the room and stood beside the piano, looking down at Maya with an expression that was difficult to read. For a moment, just a moment, Maya thought she saw something like sadness flicker across her teacher's face. But then it hardened into something else entirely. "That was adequate," Mrs. Hartley said finally, her voice flat and cold. Maya's heart sank. Adequate. After 3 months of work, after pouring her soul into this piece, adequate was all she got. But Mrs. Hartley wasn't finished. She clasped her hands behind her back and began to pace, her footsteps clicking against the hardwood floor in the quiet room. "Maya, I've been teaching piano for 23 years. In that time, I've taught hundreds of students. Some have gone on to professional careers. Most have not. Some have real talent, genuine musical gifts that set them apart. Others have enthusiasm and determination, which are admirable qualities but not sufficient on their own." Maya felt something cold and heavy settling in her stomach. She knew what was coming, had known it for months, maybe years, but had refused to accept it. Mrs. Hartley stopped pacing and turned to face her student directly, and Maya saw her teacher's expression clearly now. It wasn't angry or frustrated. It was something worse. It was pity mixed with a kind of grim satisfaction. "You fall into the latter category," Mrs. Hartley said, and her words dropped like stones into still water, sending ripples through Maya's entire world. "You work hard, harder than most students I've taught. You practice diligently. You follow instructions. But Maya," and here she paused, letting the silence build the weight of what came next, "you simply don't have what it takes to succeed as a serious pianist." The words hung in the air between them, sharp and final as a guillotine blade. Maya couldn't breathe, couldn't move, couldn't do anything but stare at her teacher with wide, disbelieving eyes. Mrs. Hartley continued, her voice taking on an almost gentle quality that made everything worse. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel, it means a lot to us. Now back to the story. I've known this for some time, but I kept hoping you might develop, that something might click. But after hearing you play that Rachmaninoff, I can't in good conscience continue to take your parents' money without being honest with you. Your technique is adequate but lacks the natural fluidity that distinguishes great players from mediocre ones. Your interpretations are safe and predictable. You play the notes correctly, but you don't understand the music, not really, not in the way that matters. And most importantly, you don't have the musical intuition, the instinct, that separates those who play piano from those who are pianists. Maya's throat tightened, and she felt tears burning behind her eyes, but she refused to let them fall, not here, not in front of this woman who had already taken so much from her. Mrs. Hartley walked to the window and looked out at the conservatory grounds, where other students walked between buildings, carrying instrument cases and sheet music, all of them pursuing their dreams while Maya's crumbled to dust. "I'm not saying this to be cruel," Mrs. Hartley said, though her back was turned so Maya couldn't see her face. "I'm saying it because it's kinder to be honest now than to let you waste years of your life chasing something you'll never achieve. There are many ways to have music in your life without being a concert pianist. You could teach beginners someday, play in a church, enjoy it as a hobby. But a professional career? Performing in major concert halls? That will never happen for you." She turned back to face Maya, and her expression was firm, decided, closed to any argument or appeal. "I'm recommending to the conservatory director that you be moved to a different program, one more suited to your level. Perhaps the community music class where the expectations are less demanding. You're 14 now, old enough to hear the truth. You'll never succeed as a serious pianist, Maya. The sooner you accept that, the sooner you can redirect your energy into something more realistic." Maya stood up from the piano bench, her legs shaking so badly she could barely support her own weight. She managed to gather her sheet music, the Rachmaninoff score she'd marked up with so many notes and reminders, the evidence of all those hours of practice that apparently meant nothing. She walked to the door of the practice room, moving like someone in a dream, and Mrs. Hartley called after her one last time. "Maya, I know this is difficult to hear, but someday you'll thank me for not letting you waste your life on an impossible dream." Maya didn't respond, didn't look back. She walked out of the practice room, down the long hallway lined with doors behind which other students practiced their impossible dreams, out of the conservatory building and into the harsh afternoon sunlight. She made it halfway across the parking lot before she finally let herself cry, deep, wrenching sobs that shook her entire body. She sat down on the curb next to the bike rack where she'd locked her bicycle that morning, a lifetime ago, when she'd still believed in herself. The tears came so hard and fast that she couldn't see, couldn't think, could only feel the enormous weight of failure crushing down on her. This was the moment when Maya Chen's childhood ended. Not in some gradual, gentle way, but all at once, sharp and brutal as a bone breaking. Everything she'd believed about herself, everything she'd worked toward, every sacrifice her parents had made, all of it suddenly seemed pointless and naive. She thought she was special, thought she had talent, thought she was meant for something more than the small life she'd been born into. But Mrs. Hartley had shown her the truth. She was ordinary. Worse than ordinary. She was someone who tried hard but would never be good enough, someone who played the notes but missed the music, someone who had wasted 2 years and thousands of her parents' hard-earned dollars chasing a dream that was never going to come true. When Maya finally gathered herself enough to ride her bike home, the sun was setting, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed almost mockingly beautiful. She rode slowly, taking the long way, not ready to face her parents and tell them what had happened. How could she explain that their daughter, the one they'd been so proud of, the one they'd sacrificed so much for, was a failure? When she finally walked through the door of the apartment above the grocery store, her mother was in the kitchen preparing dinner, and her father was at the table going over the day's receipts. They both looked up when she entered, and her mother immediately knew something was wrong. "Maya, what happened?" Her mother rushed over, her hands still damp from washing vegetables, and pulled Maya into a hug. Maya tried to hold it together, tried to be strong, but the moment her mother's arms wrapped around her, she broke down again. Between sobs, she told them everything. Mrs. Hartley's words, the recommendation to leave the conservatory, the absolute certainty in her teacher's voice when she said Maya would never succeed. Her father had listened in silence, his expression growing darker with each word. When Maya finished, he stood up from the table, and she saw something in his face she'd never seen before. Pure, undiluted anger. "That woman has no right," he said, his voice shaking with emotion. "No right to crush a child's dreams like that." Maya's mother held her daughter tighter. "We should talk to the director, go to the school board, something. This isn't right." But Maya shook her head weakly against her mother's shoulder. "What if she's right? What if I'm not good enough? What if we've been wasting all this money and I'm just not talented enough?" Her father knelt down beside her and took her hands in his. His hands were rough from years of hard work, stocking shelves and carrying boxes, hands that had built a life in a new country from nothing. "Maya, listen to me. That teacher may know music, but she doesn't know you. She doesn't know your heart. She doesn't know what you're capable of." But Maya couldn't accept the comfort. Her parents loved her, so of course they believed in her. But Mrs. Hartley was a professional, someone who'd performed on stages around the world, someone who knew what real talent looked like. And she'd looked at Maya and found her lacking. That night, Maya lay in bed staring at the ceiling, replaying every moment of the lesson in her mind. She thought about the Rachmaninoff piece, how beautiful it had sounded in her head, how clumsy and inadequate it must have been in reality. She thought about all the other students at the conservatory, the ones whose teachers praised them, encouraged them, saw potential in them. She thought about James, whose violin teacher called him gifted, who seemed to float through his lessons on a cloud of approval and validation. The next day, Maya didn't go to the conservatory. She called in sick, something she'd never done before. She spent the entire day in her room, not practicing, not even looking at her keyboard, just lying on her bed in a kind of numb despair. Her mother checked on her every few hours, bringing food that Maya didn't eat, offering comfort that Maya couldn't accept. On the third day, there was a knock on the apartment door. Maya's mother answered it and found James standing there, his violin case slung over his shoulder, looking worried. "Is Maya okay? I haven't seen her at school. Can I talk to her?" Maya's mother led him up to Maya's room, and he sat down on the edge of her bed, setting his violin case carefully on the floor. Maya was facing the wall, but she could feel him there, his presence somehow both comforting and painful. "I heard what happened," James said quietly. "The whole conservatory is talking about it. Mrs. Hartley told the director she's dropping you as a student." Maya closed her eyes, humiliation washing over her. "So everyone knows. Everyone knows I'm not good enough." "That's not what people are saying," James replied. "They're saying Mrs. Hartley went too far. Even some of the other teachers are upset about it. Apparently, she's done this before, told students they have no future, but never this harshly." Maya rolled over to face him, her eyes red from crying. "What if she's right though? What if I really don't have what it takes?" James looked at her with such sincerity that it almost hurt. "I've heard you play, Maya. You're good. Really good. Maybe even better than you realize. Mrs. Hartley is brilliant, but she's also bitter. Everyone knows that. Her career ended, and she never got over it. Some people think she resents talented students because they remind her of what she lost. But I'm not talented," Maya whispered. She made that clear. James shook his head firmly. "One person's opinion doesn't define reality. My violin teacher always says that music isn't just about technical perfection. It's about passion, dedication, the willingness to grow. You have all of that. Mrs. Hartley might not see it, but that doesn't mean it's not there." His words were kind, but Maya couldn't let them in. The wound was too fresh, too deep. James stayed for an hour, talking about school, about music, about anything except the thing that was crushing her. When he finally left, he paused at the door. Don't give up, Maya. Please. Not because of her. But giving up seemed like the only reasonable option. Over the next week, Maya made the painful decision to leave the conservatory entirely. Not just to switch teachers or move to a different program, but to quit. To walk away from music. If she couldn't be great, if she couldn't achieve the dreams she'd built her entire identity around, then what was the point of continuing? Better to cut off the limb than let the infection spread, better to kill the hope now than let it die slowly over years of mediocrity. Her parents tried to change her mind, but Maya was adamant. She was done. The director of the conservatory called personally, urging her to reconsider, offering her a place with a different teacher. But Maya declined. She couldn't bear to walk those halls anymore, couldn't stand the thought of running into Mrs. Hartley or seeing the pity in other students' eyes. On her last day at the conservatory, Maya went to clean out her practice room locker. She'd been assigned a small space where she kept extra sheet music, a metronome, pencils, and all the small tools of her musical life. As she packed everything into a cardboard box, James found her. "You're really leaving?" It wasn't a question. Maya nodded, not trusting herself to speak. James helped her carry the box out to her bike, and they stood together in the parking lot, the same place where Maya had broken down after Mrs. Hartley's devastating critique. "I'll miss you," James said simply. "You were the only person here who felt real. Everyone else is so competitive, so focused on being the best that they forget why we started playing music in the first place." Maya managed a small smile. "Why did you start?" He thought about it for a moment. "Because it made me feel something. Because when I play, I'm not just James the kid whose parents expect great things. I'm not just another student trying to meet standards. I'm myself, completely." Maya felt tears welling up again. "That's how piano made me feel too." Past tense. Made her feel. Because she was walking away from it, from that feeling, from that version of herself. The weeks that followed were strange and empty. Maya threw herself into her regular schoolwork, bringing her grades up in subjects she'd been neglecting. She joined the debate team, started volunteering at the library, did everything she could to fill the hours that used to be devoted to practice. Her parents watched her with worried eyes but didn't push, giving her space to grieve in her own way. But late at night, lying in bed, Maya would hear music in her head. Pieces she'd learned, melodies she'd loved, the sound of piano keys under her fingers. The silence in her life was so loud it was deafening. She'd walk past her keyboard, which sat in the corner of her room gathering dust, and feel a physical ache in her chest. But she never sat down to play. That part of her life was over. 3 months after leaving the conservatory, Maya ran into Mrs. Hartley at the grocery store. Her teacher was examining apples in the produce section when Maya came around the corner pushing a cart, helping her parents restock. For a moment, they just stared at each other. Then Mrs. Hartley's expression shifted into something that might have been concern or might have been satisfaction. It was hard to tell. "Maya," she said, and her voice was different than it had been in that practice room, less sharp somehow. "I heard you left the conservatory entirely." Maya kept her face neutral, refusing to let this woman see how much she was still hurting. "Yes, ma'am." Mrs. Hartley nodded slowly, and Maya could see her choosing her words carefully. "I hope you understand that what I said came from a place of experience. The music world is brutal, and I was trying to spare you years of disappointment and rejection. Better to know the truth early than to discover it too late." Maya felt anger rising in her chest, hot and sharp after months of numbness. "With all due respect, Mrs. Hartley, you didn't know the truth. You knew your opinion. There's a difference." Something flickered in her teacher's eyes, surprise maybe, or annoyance. But Maya didn't wait for a response. She pushed her cart past the older woman and continued down the aisle, her hands shaking but her head held high. It was a small act of defiance, but it felt like something shifting inside her, some small piece of herself starting to come back to life. That night, for the first time in months, Maya sat down at her keyboard. She didn't play anything complicated, just simple scales and exercises, letting her fingers remember their positions. It hurt to play, hurt to feel that familiar joy mixed with grief, but she kept going. She played for 20 minutes, then stopped, exhausted not physically but emotionally. Over the following months, Maya developed a complicated relationship with music. She couldn't walk away from it completely. It was too much a part of who she was. But she also couldn't pursue it the way she once had, with that burning ambition and innocent belief in her own potential. Instead, she played for herself, in private, never performing, never letting anyone hear. It was like having a relationship with someone who'd broken your heart. You couldn't forget them, couldn't stop caring, but you couldn't trust them anymore either. Maya finished high school with honors, though her parents still sometimes looked at her with sadness in their eyes, mourning the dream their daughter had given up. She applied to colleges, choosing schools far from home, wanting to start fresh somewhere no one knew about her brief time at the conservatory or the teacher who'd told her she'd never succeed. She was accepted to a state university 3 hours away, and she chose to study business, something practical and sensible that had nothing to do with music. Her parents helped her move into the dormitory, and her mother cried when they said goodbye, not just because her daughter was leaving home but because Maya seemed to be leaving behind a part of herself too. College was a new beginning, and Maya threw herself into it with determination. She made friends, joined clubs, went to parties, did all the normal things college students do. But she never mentioned her musical background, never told anyone about the conservatory or her dreams of being a concert pianist. That was a different person, a different life, and she'd learned to keep it locked away in a place where it couldn't hurt her anymore. In her sophomore year, Maya's roommate was a music major named Rachel who practiced her flute in their shared room. At first, it was torture, hearing music being made just a few feet away, seeing the casual joy Rachel took in her playing. But gradually, Maya found herself drawn to it, asking questions about Rachel's classes, her performances, her plans after graduation. Rachel was talented but also realistic. She talked about music as a career with clear eyes, understanding the challenges but pursuing it anyway because she couldn't imagine doing anything else. "She's everything I used to be," Maya thought one day, watching Rachel pack her flute case for a recital. Young and hopeful and still believing. One evening, Rachel came back to their room frustrated after a difficult lesson. "My professor is so hard on me," she complained, throwing herself onto her bed. "Nothing I do is good enough. Sometimes I wonder if I should just quit." Maya looked up from her textbook, and something about the moment felt intensely familiar. "What did your professor say exactly?" Rachel repeated the criticisms, about tone quality and breathing technique and musical phrasing. They were harsh but specific, technical notes aimed at improvement rather than destruction. "That's different," Maya said quietly. "Different from what?" Rachel asked. Maya realized she'd spoken out loud and hadn't meant to. She hesitated, then decided to share, just a little. "I used to study piano. Seriously, at a conservatory. My teacher told me I'd never succeed, that I didn't have what it takes. So I quit." Rachel sat up, her own frustrations forgotten. "That's awful. What a terrible thing to say to a student. Did she give you specific things to work on? Or did she just tell you that you weren't good enough?" Maya thought back to all those lessons with Mrs. Hartley, the endless criticisms that had felt so cutting at the time. But Rachel's question made her realize something she'd never considered before. Mrs. Hartley had never given her concrete steps for improvement. She'd pointed out flaws but never offered solutions. She'd identified problems but never taught Maya how to fix them. It was condemnation without guidance, criticism without construction. "I don't think she wanted me to improve," Maya said slowly, the realization dawning as she spoke. "I think she wanted me to quit." Rachel was quiet for a moment, then said something that would stick with Maya for years. "My professor is tough because she believes I can do better. Your teacher was cruel because she didn't want you to succeed. There's a difference." That conversation planted a seed in Maya's mind, though it would be a long time before it fully grew. She started thinking about Mrs. Hartley differently, not as an all-knowing authority but as a flawed person who'd let her own disappointments poison her teaching. Maya began to wonder what might have happened if she'd had a different teacher, someone who nurtured instead of crushed, someone who saw her potential instead of her limitations. But it was too late now. Years had passed. She was on a different path. Or so she thought. In her junior year, Maya took an elective business course called Arts Management because it fit her schedule and she needed the credit. The professor was a former symphony administrator who spoke passionately about the intersection of art and commerce, about supporting creative people while building sustainable organizations. For the final project, students had to propose a business plan for an arts-related venture. Maya found herself sketching out an idea for a community music school, one that would be affordable and welcoming, where teachers would focus on fostering love of music rather than just technical perfection. She poured weeks into the project, doing research on music education, interviewing local teachers, drafting budgets and marketing plans. It felt more like a calling than an assignment. When she presented it to the class, her professor was impressed. "This is really excellent work, Maya. Have you considered actually pursuing this? You clearly have insight into both the musical and business aspects." The idea took root. What if she could create something that would have helped the younger version of herself? A place where students were encouraged rather than crushed, where music was about joy and growth rather than harsh judgment and impossible standards? After graduation, Maya worked various jobs in arts administration, learning the practical side of running cultural organizations. She worked for a small theater company, then a community center that offered classes for children, then a struggling arts nonprofit that she helped pull back from the edge of bankruptcy. With each position, she learned more about funding, operations, marketing, and management. But more importantly, she learned about people, about what makes organizations succeed or fail, about how to build something sustainable and meaningful. She never stopped playing piano, though she still never performed publicly. It remained her private refuge, the thing she did alone in her apartment at the end of long days. She'd upgraded from her childhood keyboard to a real piano, a used upright she found at an estate sale. Her technique had actually improved over the years, freed from the pressure of her conservatory training. She played for pleasure now, for herself, and ironically that made her better than she'd ever been under Mrs. Hartley's instruction. By the time Maya turned 30, she'd saved enough money and built enough experience to pursue her dream of opening her own music school. She found a building in a diverse neighborhood, a former church with good acoustics and enough space for multiple teaching rooms. She spent months renovating it, installing soundproofing, buying instruments, designing a welcoming space that felt nothing like the intimidating conservatory of her youth. She called it Harmony House, and she hired teachers based not just on their credentials but on their philosophy, their kindness, their ability to see potential in every student who walked through the door. The school opened with modest expectations but grew quickly. Word spread about this place where learning music felt joyful rather than frightening, where students were encouraged to find their own voice rather than conform to rigid standards. Maya taught some classes herself, working primarily with teenagers, especially those who'd been told they weren't talented enough or who'd lost confidence in their abilities. She recognized the look in their eyes, that mixture of hope and fear and secret self-doubt. She'd worn that look herself. Every time she saw a student light up with understanding or pride, every time she watched confidence grow where there had been only insecurity, she felt like she was healing something in herself too. Harmony House became known for something unusual in the competitive world of music education, for its culture of support rather than cutthroat comparison. Students weren't ranked against each other. Performances were celebrations rather than competitions. Teachers gave honest feedback but always paired criticism with encouragement and practical steps for improvement. It was everything Maya had wished the conservatory could have been. 5 years after opening Harmony House, Maya received an invitation that made her hands shake when she opened the envelope. The Riverside Conservatory was celebrating its 75th anniversary with a special event honoring notable teachers and successful former students. As alumna, Maya Chen was cordially invited to attend. She almost threw the invitation away. The conservatory held nothing but painful memories, and the thought of returning made her stomach clench with old anxieties. But then she saw the note at the bottom, handwritten in elegant script. We'd be honored if you'd consider speaking about your work in music education. Your school has garnered quite a reputation. Sincerely, Director Catherine Moss. Maya sat with the invitation for days, turning it over in her mind. Part of her wanted nothing to do with that place, with those memories, with the possibility of running into Mrs. Hartley. But another part, a braver part, recognized an opportunity. An opportunity to face her past. An opportunity to show that she'd succeeded despite being told she never would. An opportunity to reclaim something that had been taken from her 20 years ago. She wrote back accepting the invitation and agreeing to speak. Then she immediately regretted it. Then she unregretted it. Then she regretted it again. The cycle continued up until the day of the event, when Maya found herself standing in front of her closet trying to decide what to wear to face her ghosts. She chose a simple but elegant dress, professional and confident, the uniform of someone who'd made something of herself. The drive to the conservatory felt surreal, like traveling backwards through time. The building looked exactly the same from the outside, though Maya noticed fresh paint and some new landscaping. The same tall windows let in the same golden afternoon light. But Maya was completely different from the 14-year-old girl who'd walked out of here broken and defeated. Inside, the main hall had been decorated for the anniversary celebration. Tables were set up with photographs documenting the conservatory's history, programs from famous performances, and displays highlighting successful alumni. Maya found herself looking at faces frozen in time, young musicians full of hope and potential. She wondered how many had succeeded, how many had failed, how many had been told they weren't good enough. Director Catherine Moss found Maya examining the displays and greeted her warmly. "Maya, I'm so glad you could come. I've heard wonderful things about Harmony House. You've built something truly special." "Thank you," Maya replied, feeling oddly nervous. "It means a lot to be back here." As they chatted about music education and community programs, Maya's eyes kept scanning the crowd, both dreading and anticipating the moment she knew was coming. And then she saw her. Mrs. Hartley looked older, her hair now completely silver instead of the dark brown Maya remembered, her face more lined but still carrying that same expression of stern appraisal. She stood near the refreshments table, talking to a younger woman who looked like she might be a current teacher. Maya felt her heart rate spike, felt herself transported back to that practice room 20 years ago, hearing those crushing words, "You'll never succeed as a serious pianist." Director Moss noticed Maya's sudden tension and followed her gaze. "Ah, Vivian is here. She retired from teaching 5 years ago, though she still comes to conservatory events. Have you seen her since you were a student?" "Not really," Maya said, her voice sounding strange to her own ears. "We didn't part on good terms." The director's expression shifted to understanding tinged with something else. "Regret, perhaps. I know Vivian was very demanding as a teacher. She produced some excellent technical players, but her methods were quite harsh. After she retired, we implemented new teaching standards, more emphasis on student well-being alongside musical excellence." Maya absorbed this information, feeling a complicated mix of vindication and sadness. Policy changes meant the conservatory acknowledged that teachers like Mrs. Hartley had caused harm. But those changes came too late for Maya and countless others who'd been crushed under the weight of impossible standards and cruel judgments. "Would you like me to introduce you?" Director Moss asked gently. "Or would you prefer to keep your distance?" Maya took a deep breath. "No," she said firmly. "I think it's time we spoke." They crossed the room together, weaving between clusters of guests, and Maya felt like she was walking towards something momentous, something that had been waiting for her for 2 decades. Mrs. Hartley looked up as they approached, and Maya saw the moment of recognition flicker in her old teacher's eyes. The recognition was followed by something harder to read. Mrs. Hartley set down her glass of wine carefully, her movements deliberate and controlled in that way Maya remembered so well. "Maya-chan," she said, and her voice carried none of the warmth that typically accompanied reunions between former teachers and students. "You've returned." Director Moss smiled, oblivious to or perhaps deliberately ignoring the tension crackling in the air between the two women. "Vivian," Maya has done remarkable work since leaving the conservatory. She founded Harmony House, a music school that's become quite respected in the community. I've invited her to speak this evening about innovative approaches to music education." Mrs. Hartley's expression remained neutral, but Maya caught the slight tightening around her eyes, the barely perceptible stiffening of her posture. "How nice," she said, and those two words carried layers of meaning that only Maya could fully interpret. The condescension was subtle but unmistakable, wrapped in a veneer of politeness. Director Moss excused herself to greet other guests, leaving Maya and Mrs. Hartley facing each other across 20 years of silence and unresolved pain. For a long moment, neither spoke. The sounds of the anniversary celebration continued around them, conversations and laughter and the clink of glasses, but in their small bubble the air felt thick and difficult to breathe. "You must be pleased with yourself," Mrs. Hartley finally said, her tone carefully modulated to sound conversational rather than accusatory. "Opening your own school. Teaching the way you think music should be taught." There was an implication buried in her words, a suggestion that Maya's approach was somehow lesser, softer, lacking the rigor of serious musical instruction. Maya felt the old instinct to shrink, to apologize, to defer to this woman's authority. But she wasn't 14 anymore. She'd built a life and a career and helped countless students find their voices. She had nothing to apologize for. "I am pleased," Maya replied evenly. "We've helped a lot of students discover their love of music. Some have gone on to professional careers. Others play for personal enjoyment. Both outcomes are valuable." Mrs. Hartley's lips pressed into that thin line Maya remembered so well. "Of course, if the goal is simply enjoyment. But serious musical training requires more than making students feel good about themselves. It requires honesty about their limitations." The word limitations landed like a stone between them, and Maya understood that they weren't really talking about teaching philosophy. They were talking about that day 20 years ago when Mrs. Hartley had told a frightened 14-year-old that she would never succeed. Maya met her former teacher's gaze directly, refusing to look away. "I remember your honesty, Mrs. Hartley. You told me I didn't have what it takes. That I should give up my dreams because I'd never amount to anything as a pianist." Something flickered in the older woman's eyes, defensiveness perhaps, or the faintest hint of discomfort. "I told you the truth as I saw it. The music world is brutally competitive, and I believed I was saving you from years of disappointment." "Was that really your motivation?" Maya asked quietly. "Or were you projecting your own disappointments onto your students?" The question hung in the air, sharp and challenging. Around them, the anniversary celebration continued, but in their corner of the room, something significant was happening. A reckoning delayed by 2 decades was finally taking place. Mrs. Hartley drew herself up straighter, her expression hardening into the familiar mask of cold authority. "How dare you suggest that I allowed my personal circumstances to affect my professional judgment? I taught at this conservatory for 30 years. I trained dozens of technically proficient pianists. My standards were high because excellence demands high standards." Maya noticed that Mrs. Hartley had said technically proficient rather than successful or fulfilled or happy. She trained students to play notes correctly, but had she taught them to love music? Had she helped them find their own artistic voices? Or had she simply tried to replicate her own approach, her own interpretation, her own understanding of what music should be, crushing any student who couldn't or wouldn't conform to her narrow vision? "Your standards broke me," Maya said, and she was surprised by how steady her voice remained despite the emotion churning inside her. "I was 14 years old, and I loved music more than anything in the world. I practiced until my fingers ached. I memorized pieces most students my age couldn't even attempt. I poured my heart into every lesson, desperate for one word of encouragement from you. And instead, you told me I was wasting everyone's time. If you couldn't handle honest criticism, perhaps you weren't cut out for a career in music," Mrs. Hartley responded, but there was something defensive in her tone now, a crack in the armor of certainty she'd always worn. "The music world doesn't coddle people. Performers face harsh reviews, brutal competition, constant rejection. I was preparing you for that reality. You weren't preparing me, Maya said firmly. You were destroying me. There's a difference between honest feedback and cruelty. A good teacher pushes students to improve while believing in their potential. You pushed without believing. You criticized without teaching. You saw every flaw but never showed me how to fix them. Mrs. Hartley's face flushed slightly, and Maya saw her grip tighten on her wine glass. I gave you technical corrections in every lesson. You chose not to implement them. Because you made me so anxious that I couldn't think straight during lessons, Maya replied. I'd spend all week practicing, feeling good about my progress, and then I'd sit down in that practice room with you watching, and my hands would shake so badly I could barely play. You created an environment of fear, not learning. That's not teaching, Mrs. Hartley. That's bullying. The word bullying seemed to strike Mrs. Hartley like a physical blow. Her expression shifted through several emotions in rapid succession: shock, anger, indignation, and something that might have been shame before settling back into rigid defensiveness. I had high standards, she repeated, as if saying it enough times would make it true in the way she wanted it to be true. The conservatory board supported my methods. My students consistently scored well in competitions. The board didn't see what happened behind closed doors, Maya countered. They saw the results you wanted them to see. The students who succeeded despite your teaching, not because of it. And what about all the ones who quit? The ones who left music entirely because you convinced them they weren't good enough? Do they count in your assessment of your teaching career? For the first time, Mrs. Hartley seemed at a loss for words. She looked away, her gaze drifting across the anniversary celebration, the displays of conservatory history, the photographs of smiling students who represented only the success stories, never the casualties. Maya pressed on, her voice gaining strength as she finally said things she'd needed to say for 20 years. I almost stopped playing piano entirely because of you. 4 months after I left the conservatory, I couldn't even look at a keyboard without feeling sick. You didn't just critique my playing. You attacked my worth as a person. You made me believe I was fundamentally inadequate, that my dreams were foolish, that I should be ashamed for even trying. I never intended, Mrs. Hartley began, but Maya cut her off. Intent doesn't matter when the impact is devastating. Maybe you thought you were being helpful. Maybe you genuinely believed you were doing the right thing. But you damaged me, Mrs. Hartley. You damaged a lot of students over the years. And the fact that you still can't acknowledge that you're still defending your methods instead of questioning them, that tells me you learned nothing from the pain you caused. The older woman's face had gone pale, and Maya noticed her hand trembling slightly as she set down her wine glass on a nearby table. Around them, other guests were starting to glance their way, sensing tension even if they couldn't hear the conversation. Director Moss appeared at Maya's elbow, her expression concerned. Maya, we're about to begin the speaking portion of the evening. Are you ready? Maya took a deep breath, pulling herself back from the intensity of the confrontation. Yes, I'm ready. She looked at Mrs. Hartley one last time. You told me I'd never succeed as a serious pianist. You were right about one thing: I didn't become a concert performer. But I did something more important. I created a place where students are treated with respect and kindness. Where their love of music is nurtured instead of crushed. Where teachers build confidence instead of destroying it. So in the end, Mrs. Hartley, I succeeded in ways you never imagined. And I did it despite everything you said, despite every doubt you planted in my mind. With that, Maya turned and walked away, following Director Moss toward the small stage that had been set up at one end of the hall. Her heart was pounding, adrenaline flooding her system, but she also felt strangely light, as if she'd set down a heavy burden she'd been carrying for 2 decades. The director took the microphone and called for everyone's attention. The conversations gradually quieted as guests found seats or gathered near the stage. Maya stood to the side, suddenly nervous about speaking in front of this crowd, many of whom were distinguished musicians and educators. But then she remembered why she'd agreed to come, not to seek approval from these people, but to share what she'd learned, to offer a different vision of what music education could be. Director Moss gave a brief introduction, highlighting Maya's work at Harmony House and the school's innovative approach to teaching. Then she gestured for Maya to take the microphone. Maya stepped forward, looking out at the sea of faces. She spotted Mrs. Hartley near the back, arms crossed, expression unreadable. She saw James, her old friend from the conservatory, grinning and giving her an encouraging thumbs up. She saw teachers and students and parents, all waiting to hear what she had to say. She began speaking, and her voice was stronger than she expected. 20 years ago, I left the Riverside Conservatory believing I was a failure. I'd been told by my teacher that I didn't have what it takes to succeed in music, that my dreams were unrealistic, that I should give up and find something more suited to my limited abilities. Maya paused, letting that sink in. She saw a few people shift uncomfortably, including some of the older faculty members who'd been teaching at the conservatory during her time there. For years, I believed that assessment was true. I quit playing piano entirely for a while. I walked away from the thing I loved most in the world because one person convinced me I wasn't good enough. But eventually, I found my way back to music. Not as a performer, but as an educator. And in that role, I discovered something important. The teacher who told me I'd never succeed was wrong. Not just about my potential, but about what success in music actually means. She went on to talk about Harmony House, about their philosophy of teaching, about the students who'd flourished under encouragement rather than harsh criticism. She talked about the difference between pushing students to improve and crushing their spirits in the name of standards. She shared stories of teenagers who'd been told they had no talent, who'd come to Harmony House defeated and left confident and capable. One of our first students was a 15-year-old girl whose previous teacher told her she was tone-deaf and should stick to listening rather than playing, Maya said. She'd convinced herself that she was fundamentally broken, unable to make music like other people. But the problem wasn't her ability. It was that she'd been taught in a way that didn't work for her learning style. She needed patience and creative approaches and the freedom to make mistakes without judgment. Maya smiled, remembering. Today, she's studying music therapy at university. She wants to work with children who have developmental disabilities, using music as a tool for connection and healing. She found her path not despite being told she wasn't good enough, but because she refused to accept that verdict as final. The audience was listening intently now, and Maya could see nods of agreement, particularly among the younger teachers. She continued, her confidence growing. We need to rethink what we mean by success in music education. Is success only measured by who makes it to Carnegie Hall? Or do we count the church pianist who brings joy to their congregation every Sunday? The parent who plays lullabies for their children? The office worker who unwinds after stressful days by sitting at their keyboard? She gestured broadly, encompassing the whole conservatory. Places like this are important. We need institutions that train professional musicians, that maintain high standards, that push students toward excellence. But we also need to question how we define excellence and whether our methods of teaching actually serve our students or just perpetuate cycles of trauma and self-doubt. Some of the older faculty members looked distinctly uncomfortable now, but Maya also saw several people nodding vigorously, including Director Moss. The best teachers I've known, Maya continued, are the ones who see potential where others see limitations. Who adapt their teaching to the student rather than forcing every student into the same mold. Who give honest feedback wrapped in encouragement. Who understand that their job isn't just to teach technique, but to help students fall in love with music so deeply that they'll keep playing long after the lessons end. She took a breath, preparing for what she wanted to say next. This was the part that mattered most, the message she'd come here to deliver. To any students here today who've been told they're not good enough, I want you to hear this. One person's opinion of your abilities is not objective truth. It's just opinion, shaped by that person's own experiences, biases, and limitations. A teacher who tells you that you have no future in music may be wrong. They may be projecting their own disappointments. They may simply not be the right teacher for you. Maya's eyes found Mrs. Hartley in the crowd. Don't let anyone steal your love of music. If you enjoy playing, if it brings you joy, if you feel something shift inside you when your fingers touch the keys or your bow crosses the strings, that matters. That's real. Don't let anyone convince you otherwise. The room was completely silent now, everyone hanging on her words. She saw a young student in the front row wiping tears from her eyes. Find teachers who believe in you, Maya said. Find environments that nurture rather than crush. And if you can't find them, create them. Build communities where music is about joy and growth, not just competition and criticism. Because music belongs to everyone, not just the technically perfect, not just the prodigies, not just the ones who fit a narrow definition of talent. It belongs to anyone who loves it enough to keep showing up, to keep trying, to keep growing. When she finished speaking, there was a moment of silence, and then applause began, tentative at first but building quickly. People stood, the applause growing louder, and Maya saw genuine emotion on many faces. James was clapping so hard his hands must have hurt, grinning through tears. Director Moss hugged her as she stepped away from the microphone. That was powerful, Maya. Truly powerful. Thank you for sharing your story. As the formal program concluded and guests mingled again, Maya found herself surrounded by people wanting to talk to her. Current students asked questions about Harmony House. Young teachers wanted to know more about her teaching philosophy. Parents thanked her for advocating for a more compassionate approach to music education. Through the crowd, Maya caught glimpses of Mrs. Hartley, still standing alone near the back of the room, looking somehow smaller than before. James finally fought his way through the crowd to hug Maya tightly. That was incredible, he said. I'm so proud of you. How does it feel? Maya considered the question. It feels like closing a circle. Like finally saying everything I needed to say. They talked for a few minutes, catching up on the years since they'd last seen each other. James was teaching violin now, working at a public high school and giving private lessons on the side. I try to remember what you went through, he said. It helps me be more patient with my struggling students. When everyone else starts to drift away, Maya noticed Mrs. Hartley approaching. Her former teacher moved slowly, hesitantly, looking older and more uncertain than Maya had ever seen her. May I speak with you privately? Mrs. Hartley asked quietly. Maya hesitated, then nodded. They moved to a quieter corner of the hall, away from the remaining guests. For a long moment, Mrs. Hartley simply stood there, and Maya could see her struggling with something, trying to find words that clearly didn't come easily. Your speech, the older woman finally said, her voice barely above a whisper. It made me think about things I haven't wanted to think about for a long time. Maya waited, offering no help, no easy absolution. This was Mrs. Hartley's moment to either step up or retreat back into defensiveness. When I was young, Mrs. Hartley continued, her eyes fixed on some point past Maya's shoulder, unable to meet her gaze, I was told I was the most promising pianist my teacher had ever seen. I believed I would have a brilliant career. I believed I was destined for greatness. She paused, pain flickering across her features. Then I injured my hand, and that future vanished overnight. One moment I was on the path to everything I'd dreamed of, and the next moment it was gone. Maya listened, starting to understand something about this woman who'd caused her so much pain. When I started teaching, Mrs. Hartley went on, I think I was trying to prepare students for the disappointment that I experienced. The music world had been cruel to me, had taken away everything I loved, and I thought I was being realistic, being honest about how brutal this career could be. But what you said tonight about projection, about teachers putting their own disappointments onto students, Mrs. Hartley's voice cracked slightly. I've been thinking about all the students I taught over the years. How many of them quit because of me? How many had their love of music destroyed because I couldn't separate my own bitterness from my teaching? She finally looked at Maya directly, and there were tears in the older woman's eyes. I'm not asking for forgiveness. What I did to you, what I said to you, that was cruel. You were just a child, and I crushed your dreams because I couldn't bear to see someone else achieving what I'd lost. That's not teaching. That's abuse, dressed up in academic language. Maya felt her own eyes stinging. She'd imagined this moment so many times over the years, imagined Mrs. Hartley apologizing, and in her imagination she'd always felt triumphant, vindicated. But now that it was actually happening, she mostly just felt sad. Sad for the young pianist whose career had ended. Sad for the bitter teacher who'd hurt so many students. Sad for all the wasted potential, all the damaged confidence, all the stolen joy. "I appreciate you saying that," Maya replied carefully. "It doesn't erase what happened, but it helps to understand where it came from." Mrs. Hartley nodded, wiping at her eyes with a trembling hand. "You asked earlier if I learned nothing from the pain I caused. The truth is, I spent 30 years not learning, not questioning, not seeing what I was doing to people. I told myself I was maintaining standards, being rigorous, preparing students for reality. But really, I was just passing on my pain." They stood together in silence, two women connected by shared history and mutual damage, finally having the conversation they should have had 2 decades ago. "I think about what might have been different," Mrs. Hartley said quietly, "if I'd encouraged you instead of crushing you. You had something special, Maya. A sensitivity, a connection to the music that wasn't just technical. I saw it, and instead of nurturing it, I tried to stamp it out because it reminded me too much of what I'd lost." Maya absorbed this, understanding that in some twisted way, she'd been good enough that Mrs. Hartley had felt threatened by her potential. The recognition should have felt validating, but mostly it just felt like waste. "I built something good with Harmony House," Maya said. "I help students find their voices, and every time I do that, I'm healing something in myself too. So maybe things worked out the way they needed to. But Mrs. Hartley, there are probably hundreds of students you taught over the years who aren't as resilient as I was. Students who quit music entirely and never came back. Students who believed your assessment of their worth. That's the real tragedy, not what happened to me, but what happened to all of them." The older woman nodded slowly, and Maya could see the weight of that truth settling on her shoulders. "I know," she whispered. "I carry them with me. All those faces, all those young people whose confidence I shattered. I can't undo it, but I want you to know that I see it now. I finally see what I did." Maya felt something shift in her chest, some long-held knot of anger and hurt beginning to loosen. She would never forget what Mrs. Hartley had done to her, and she would never say it was acceptable. But maybe, just maybe, she could start to let go of the weight of it. "Have you thought about reaching out to some of your former students?" Maya asked. "Maybe there are others who would benefit from hearing what you just told me." Mrs. Hartley looked genuinely terrified by the suggestion, but also thoughtful. "I wouldn't even know where to start. Or if they'd want to hear from me." "Start with the ones you can find," Maya suggested. "Write letters. Send emails. Don't expect forgiveness, but offer acknowledgement. Sometimes that's enough, just knowing that the person who hurt you finally understands that they hurt you." The anniversary celebration was winding down now, guests collecting coats and saying goodbyes. Director Moss approached to thank Maya again for speaking, and the moment of intense connection between Maya and Mrs. Hartley passed, shifting into something more ordinary. As Maya prepared to leave, Mrs. Hartley touched her arm gently. "Maya, I know I have no right to ask this, but would you be willing to stay in touch? I'd like to hear more about your work at Harmony House. Perhaps I could volunteer there, help with administrative tasks or fundraising. I can't teach anymore, I know that. But maybe I could contribute in some small way to fixing what I broke." Maya considered the request. Part of her wanted to refuse, to maintain clear boundaries with this woman who'd caused her so much pain. But another part recognized that people could change, that growth sometimes came late in life, that redemption was possible even for those who'd done real harm. "Let me think about it," Maya said honestly. "I need to process all of this. But I appreciate your willingness to try to make amends." Mrs. Hartley nodded, accepting this without argument. "Thank you for coming back here, for facing me, for saying what you needed to say. You've become exactly the kind of teacher I should have been." The drive home felt different than the drive there. Maya had arrived tense and anxious, carrying 20 years of unresolved anger and hurt. She left feeling lighter, not healed completely but no longer quite so burdened. She'd said what she needed to say. She'd heard what she'd never expected to hear. She'd closed a circle that had been hanging open since she was 14 years old. When she got home, Maya sat down at her piano, the beautiful upright that had witnessed so many late-night practice sessions, so many moments of frustration and breakthrough and joy. She played the Rachmaninoff Prelude in G minor, the piece she'd played for Mrs. Hartley all those years ago, the piece that had been the soundtrack to her greatest humiliation. But this time, playing it felt different. She wasn't playing to prove anything or to earn anyone's approval. She was playing because she loved the music, because it made her feel something profound, because she could. Her fingers moved across the keys with confidence born from 20 years of private practice, years of teaching, years of learning to trust her own musical instincts rather than waiting for external validation. The piece unfolded beautifully, the dark opening giving way to moments of transcendent beauty, exactly the way she heard it in her head. When she finished, Maya sat with her hands resting on the keys, feeling the vibrations fade into silence. She thought about the 14-year-old girl who'd played this piece in a practice room, desperate for approval, terrified of failure. She thought about the young woman who'd almost given up music entirely because one person told her she wasn't good enough. And she thought about who she'd become, someone who'd created something meaningful despite every obstacle, someone who helped others find their voices, someone who'd succeeded in ways Mrs. Hartley had never imagined. Tomorrow she'd go back to Harmony House, back to her students and teachers and the daily work of building a community around music. She'd continue helping teenagers discover their potential, continue showing them that one person's harsh judgment wasn't the final word on their worth or abilities. And maybe, if Mrs. Hartley reached out again, Maya would find a way to let her contribute to that work, to let her be part of healing rather than harm. But tonight, Maya simply sat at her piano in the quiet of her apartment and played for herself. She played the pieces she loved, the ones that made her feel connected to something larger than herself. She played with all the technical skill she developed and all the emotional depth that Mrs. Hartley had once told her she lacked. She played because music was part of who she was, woven into the fabric of her identity, and no one could take that away from her. Not anymore. The city lights sparkled outside her window, and the music filled her small apartment with sound and meaning. Maya smiled to herself, feeling genuinely happy, genuinely at peace. She'd gone back to face her past, and she'd emerged from that confrontation stronger and clearer about who she was and what she'd built. The girl who'd been told she'd never succeed had not only succeeded but had created success on her own terms, by her own definitions. She'd found her path not in the concert halls Mrs. Hartley had valued above all else, but in the smaller, more intimate space of teaching, of nurturing, of helping others discover what she'd had to discover for herself, that the love of music was enough, that passion mattered more than perfection, that there were many ways to have music in your life, and all of them were valid. 20 years after being told she had no future in music, Maya sat at her piano and played into the night, and the music she created was beautiful not because it met someone else's standards, but because it was authentically, uniquely, perfectly hers. That was the real triumph, not proving Mrs. Hartley wrong, but proving to herself that she'd always been right to keep believing, right to keep playing, right to trust that music would find a place in her life even if that place looked different than she'd originally imagined. The anniversary celebration at the conservatory had given her closure, but more than that, it had given her perspective. She could see now how much she'd grown, how much she'd overcome, how much she'd accomplished. The frightened teenager who'd fled that building in tears had become a confident woman who walked back in with her head held high. And that transformation, that journey from devastation to triumph, that was worth more than any concert hall performance could ever be. Maya played until her fingers grew tired, until the city outside her window settled into the deep quiet of late night. When she finally closed the piano and prepared for bed, she felt the kind of satisfaction that comes from facing your fears and discovering they no longer have power over you. She'd returned to the place of her greatest defeat and turned it into a moment of victory, not through revenge or bitterness, but through the simple act of living well, of building something meaningful, of refusing to let one person's cruel assessment define her worth. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new students who needed encouragement, new opportunities to spread the message that everyone deserves to have music in their lives. But tonight, Maya fell asleep with a smile on her face, dreaming of melodies yet to be played and students yet to be taught. The girl who'd been told she'd never succeed had done more than succeed. She'd transformed her pain into purpose, her defeat into determination, her brokenness into a bridge that others could cross to reach their own dreams. And that, Maya understood as sleep claimed her, was the sweetest triumph of all. Years later, Maya expanded Harmony House into 5 locations across the state. Mrs. Hartley volunteered weekly, answering phones and greeting families. She wrote letters to former students, seeking forgiveness. Some responded with grace, others with silence. Maya didn't become a concert pianist, but she shaped hundreds who found joy in music. On quiet evenings, she still played Rachmaninoff, remembering the girl who refused to let cruelty define her. The piano teacher who said she'd never succeed witnessed Maya's triumph daily, learning that true success isn't measured in applause but in lives transformed through compassion. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.